All right, hi guys. I'm trying out something new where we are actually it's not really new. You would have seen my recordings on YouTube before, but I'm using a brand new software to do recording here, so I don't have as much control as I would like to have. And also, this is a strategy, what we call a flipped classroom, where you actually listen to me doing this as homework at home at your own time, and after you come to class having sat through and listened to me, and then after that you would do the work in class. And also I'm trying something new in that you actually do see my face. Please do give me feedback as to if my handsome face is actually a distraction or actually it helps you to learn better. So do let me know. I never thought that having my face there was necessary, and I thought that my voice is sufficient, but trying something new. Let me know how it goes. All right, and also, if you are here just for the purposes of revision, hopefully this will be helpful. And you can revisit the videos anytime you want. If you have missed a lesson, or if halfway through the lesson you switched off and you start sleeping for some reason, well, you have this recording and hopefully it helps you. Right, so let's get started. Okay, now we are on chapter 4. Okay, now as opposed to the as different from the first three chapters, you will realize that the first three chapters are broken up into two parts. Okay, the first chapter we frequently identify as the Treaty of Versailles chapter and the League of Nations chapter. Then for chapters 2 and 3, you have Stalin and Hitler. We look at the rise, and after that, we look at the impact. Now, for the next four chapters, 4, 5, 6, and 7, there's only one part to it, and it's reasons why the war broke out and reasons why certain countries lost the war. Right. So if you're looking at this in the point of view from reasons why the war broke out, now I'm going to be trying this. All right. So we are looking at the outbreak, or rather the reasons. Now I apologize if I look funny in the video. Reasons for outbreak of World War II. Okay, you realize that actually we touched on World War One, but we didn't go into in-depth detail about this. Now, for this chapter, again, if you start off every chapter, as I always tell you to do, look at the last page of the chapter to look at how the chapter is being organized. So for this particular chapter, there's just three reasons. Okay. Okay, the first reason is the weakness of the League of Nations. Then the second reason, it's all about Hitler. Okay, Hitler's aggressive, oh my goodness, foreign policy. And then the last one is about the appeasement policy. And how did this cause World War II to start? Now this isn't ideal, but again, experiment. Let me know your feedback. All right. So it's broken up into these three. Now you would realize that under the rest of it, there's a lot more factors or events to study about. So it is categorized in this way that it is three broad factors with quite a few events under it, which can also be considered as sub-factors. So it depends on the questions that you're going to be facing. Oh yes, and also a reminder, the next four chapters are pure SEQ chapters. Okay, it's all essay questions, and so there's no sources involved in this. Right. So let's get started. If you Yeah, you can take a look at the photo. You can pause the video if you want to take a look and think about the questions, but I'm going to move on. So this is the issue or the inquiry question that you will see in your textbook. Okay, among the factors leading to World War II in Europe, which one was more significant? Hitler's expansionist policy or the policy of appeasement? Now, if you, um, oh goodness. Yes, I'm recording this in school. Right, so it looks like there's only two factors here: Hitler's expansionist policy, or the policy of appeasement, but there is that actually third factor that we start off with on the weakness of the League of Nations. Now, if that sounded familiar to you, it is because the weakness of the League of Nations, we did look at it in chapter 1. You're going to see it overlapping in this chapter, and the questions are going to be tricky. So I would have a separate lesson based on that alone where we address the structured essay questions and why is it tricky and why is it not. But for now, this is purely a contents-based video, right? So I'm going to move on. And so the first part of it, I'm just going to cover the first factor, okay? Reasons for the weakness of the reasons for the weakness of the League of Nations is how the weakness of the League of Nations actually caused World War II to start, okay? All right, again, so these are the three factors that I very badly drew it on just now, right? Now, the first one, okay, on the weakness of the League of Nations, okay, now the fella that you see in the picture, that is Hitler's ally, Benito Mussolini, who was in charge of Italy and died a very ugly death. Okay, you can go and Google how did this poor man, okay, he's not really poor, but how did this man die, all right? And looking at the weakness of the League of Nations, we are focused on two areas of weaknesses, the failure to disarm and specifically the Abyssinian crisis. Now, if you recall in chapter 1, we actually look at Abyssinian crisis, touched on it, and we also look at the Manchurian crisis. So the Manchurian crisis is going to come up again in chapter 6, where again you will see weakness of the League of Nations again, right? Okay, failure of disarmaments. The League was unable to achieve much success in disarmament. The whole point of disarmament is that they would eventually lessen tensions between countries, because when we do cut down and cut back on this on our arms, it does actually uh, lower the possibility of war breaking out. Okay, and success achieved in disarmament were achieved through the efforts of individual major European powers, not the League. So there were some successes, but unfortunately, the League wasn't responsible for these successes. Okay, so this meant that powerful countries, they had the military capacity for war, and the League could not stop them from engaging in conflicts. So now, as we continue to build arms, and as long as there's no trust between the countries, we will continue to have strong militaries. And I have always emphasized on the strength of militaries, as we have seen in the current examples. At the point of recording of this video, the military has overthrown the Myanmar governments, and in the past we have seen the Thai military overthrow the Thai governments, and actually right now the prime minister in charge of Thailand is actually military personnel. So yeah, if we fail to actually disarm, it puts these people in charge, and the likelihood of war breaking out much higher. Okay. Now the League of Nations did try to organize major disarmament conferences in 1926 and 1930s. However, the major powers refused to cooperate. Now, I think this is something that is extremely difficult to do, because even today, uh, I don't think ever since League of Nations till our time, any country was really very successful in disarming. Perhaps, okay, next year you're going to study about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they saw the need to actually disarm and to cut down on the nuclear weapons. And I think that was the only instance where actually the world did see a reduction in the arms, and nuclear arms specifically. But otherwise, if you look at each country's military spending, right, yeah, we have been spending non-stop. In Singapore, our biggest budget goes to defense, right? So the major powers I mentioned did not trust each other, and they placed their own national interests above international peace, which is only natural. If you are the leader of the country, you would be worried about protecting yourself, defending yourself. So therefore, if we ask you to actually disarm, this is something that would not be desirable. Okay. Now, so these are the examples of the successes and failures of disarmament, and some you will see that most of the most of them are actually not organized by the League. Okay, now the first one that you absolutely need to remember to use as an example is the Washington Naval Conference. Okay, unfortunately, it wasn't organized by the League. It was a success, and what it did was to set the ratio for tonnage of capital ships reduction or limitation among the major powers. And it was in this particular ratio, 5:5:3, uh, among USA to Britain to Japan, respectively. So USA and Britain is going to have the ratio of 5 each, and Japan will have the ratio of 3. So in other words, if you know your math, which you absolutely should, if Japan has 6 ships. How many ships does USA have? Now you can pause the video and do the math if you need to, but the answer should be 10. Okay, so that is how the ratio works. It basically limits them. Now, obviously, the rest of the countries who are not involved in this would understandably have lesser ships than the three major countries that were mentioned. Okay, next is the Locarno Treaties. Was it a success or not? It's not quite sure. The terms of the Treaty of Versailles was accepted by the Weimar governments, and to be honest, this being a big question mark, we're not going to go in depth into this particular Locarno treaties. Okay, now there was the World Disarmament Conference in 1926. It was organized by the League, but unfortunately, Britain and France refused to cooperate, so it was a failure. And then next, we have the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. It wasn't organized by the League. It also wasn't a success, where the agreement that conflicts should be resolved in a peaceful manner. However, there was no clear way to enforce the pact. So again, this was a failure. And then, right, sorry, just now I mentioned the World Disarmament Conference already. That was the preparation. So the actual conference itself, yeah, it was not successful because Germany insisted that other powers should match its disarmament level, which, if you recall, according to the Treaty of Versailles, it was a very um, bad disarmament level, right? So therefore, the rest of the countries like Britain, France, and USA would definitely refuse to agree to that requirement. So Germany resigned from this World Disarmament Conference, and nothing came out of it. Now, the failure of disarmament highlighted the importance of USA in international affairs. If you recall, USA were not part of the League of Nations, so nothing could be enforced. And why are they important? Why were they important? Because its economic and military strength commanded more influence than the weakened European nations in the League. So, without the USA to enforce whatever that they wish to carry out in terms of disarmaments, it was difficult to ensure that disarmament was a success. Now, the League leaders, Britain and France, they were weakened by World War One and the Great Depression. And recall the year for the Great Depression is 1929, where they prefer to focus on national interests and rather than the interests of the League. So their unwillingness to disarm meant no meaningful progress could be made by the League towards disarmament. So without the USA to actually enforce, nothing would happen. So this continued to contribute to the atmosphere of distrust and tension that would ultimately lead to World War II. Now, if you recall very vaguely in chapter 1, when we talk about reasons for World War one of the main reasons for World War One was arms race. So there was an increase in the building up of arms, and that eventually led to World War One. So obviously, nobody learned anything from history, and the attempt, all right, they did learn, they did try to disarm, but unfortunately, they were not able to successfully carry out any form of disarmament, and that contributed to World War Two starting. Sorry, let me just go back. So if you are actually looking at the slides and the screen, okay, that the last line there would actually form part of your links or part of your explanations in SEQ. Now, next, we're going to look at the specific example of Abyssinian crisis. Right, so I don't think I can actually show you video. So then, this is the part where actually you are listening and watching. Actually, in fact, you can just listen to me, like on the bus. You don't even have to watch the video. Something like a podcast kind of thing. And then when it comes to videos and movies and whatnot, that will be what I will be doing in class then. All right. Now, so the Abyssinian crisis, there are quite a few videos to watch about this. All right, there was a dispute between Abyssinia and Italy um, in Somalia. Now, so the Abyssinian emperor actually appealed, not appeased, sorry, there's a mistake there, appealed to the League for help. Now, Abyssinia, if you look at the map, this is where I hate this recording function. It's very troublesome for me to pause and switch screens. So, again, if you have your phones with you, open up Google Maps and look for Ethiopia. Okay, so currently the country Abyssinia is called Ethiopia, somewhere in the northeast of the continents of Africa. Okay, so uh, what happens was that there was a dispute, and using this dispute as an excuse, Italy invaded Abyssinia. And this breached the League of Nations covenant in that no country should be attacking and invading any other country. But if you watch, okay, again, I'm going to be showing the videos in class. If you watch the videos, you would see that um, Italy was doing it mainly to boost their national pride and looking over at Hitler, who was actually taking other countries as well. Okay, the timeline doesn't match, but eventually Hitler would actually start to do that as well. So then it forms a part of a national pride for these countries, where taking over another smaller country would boost that nation's prestige and look better and look good. So by May 1936, Italy would have conquered Abyssinia. Mussolini and Hitler signed a Treaty of Friendship in November 1936, and they established the Rome-Berlin Axis. So that's the formation of the ally between Italy and Germany. Now, we won't be using the term ally to address these two countries. They are the Axis powers, AXIS, Axis powers, together with Japan. So the three of them form the major bad guys of World War II. Okay. Now, so what did the League do to try to address this Abyssinian crisis? They imposed an embargo on certain products to Italy, but they delayed the ban of sale of oil as they did not want to hurt the economic interests of the League members. Now, remember this, when we place an embargo on certain countries, let's say if it's an oil embargo, it means to say we stop selling oil to that country. And oil is a very, very precious resource. You would see this in chapter 5, where without actually this resource, that actually contributed to Germany's defeat in World War II. So when the League of Nations did not want to actually ban the sale of oil to Italy, the reason being that if, let's say, Britain was the one that was selling the oil, and if you ban sale of oil to Italy, Britain will be losing out economically because they cannot sell the oil to Italy. So therefore, this embargo, this measures was not effective at all. So now, what did Britain and France actually do? They were actually allies with Italy under this thing called the Strezza Fronts. So they did not actually want to offend Mussolini, and they also did not want to close the Suez Canal to Italian ships, because if they are closing the Suez Canal to Italian ships, the Italy would be able to continue to ship war supplies to Abyssinia. Okay, so if you close it to them, it would actually stop the war supplies, and then it would actually halt the invasion of Abyssinia. So then they came up with this thing called the Hoare-Laval Plan, probably pronouncing it wrong. Now, to secretly give two-thirds of Abyssinia to Italy to stop the invasion. Obviously, if you think of it from the point of view of the purpose of the League of Nations, that's not what Britain and France are supposed to be doing. And also, what gave Britain and France the right to give two-thirds of a country that don't belong to them to another country? It doesn't make sense. And you're going to see this happening again later under Hitler's expansionist policy. Okay, it's ridiculous. It's like these countries, the major powers, is like, I'm big, I'm mighty, I can decide whatever I want to decide, even though it doesn't belong to me. Doesn't make sense at all. Okay. So again, if you look at the comic here, we don't want you to fight, but by jingo, if you do, we shall probably issue a joint memorandum suggesting a mild disapproval of you, right? So that's what the League of Nations can do, scold people, and nothing more, right? So now, how is this linked to World War II, the start of World War II? Okay, again, if you think in terms of an SEQ, okay, the main reason for World War II starting is due to the weakness of the League of Nations. How far do you agree with this statement? Explain your answer. Okay. The League's failure to intervene in the Abyssinian crisis in 1935, it would convince Hitler that the League would not be able to stop his ambitious plans for expansion. So therefore, it comes back to how the League, being weak, okay, would enable Hitler, would convince Hitler that he can do whatever he wants. Think of it in terms of, let's say, the discipline in our school is particularly weak, And if you as students start to see that, you know, if you bring food up to the class from the canteen and nobody stops you, the discipline master sees you and doesn't do anything about it, you would more likely be emboldened to do more ridiculous things that would get you in trouble if, you know, if the discipline committee was actually doing something. Okay. Right. So obviously, to address the question, what does the cartoonist think about the effectiveness of the League of Nations? Not so effective. Now you see why we actually have to enforce punishments on you guys, because without the punishments, you will not be effective students in studying and learning. Right. Okay, so that actually concludes the first part about the weakness of the League of Nations. You should, you can actually go back to it. You can re-look at the video. You can pause the video if you are taking down your own notes. Hopefully, this will be something that will be very helpful to you in terms of understanding. Again, you can use it for revision when you come back to it again for WAs, for exams, for O levels even, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. Please do have your textbooks with you as well. I think it will complement it. If there's anything that you don't understand from what I'm saying, look at the textbook. If there's anything that you don't understand from what the textbook is telling you, you can, yeah, come back to me again. Right, and I'm going to stop the video here. But for the purposes of flipped classroom, there will be some further instructions given to you guys. Okay, so for those classes that are watching this video, please do look at my further instructions.